This is what Times Square looked like before it had any neon signs. But how did it go from this to this? Well, that's what I'll explain right now. Before Times Square was the crossroads of the world, it was just farmland. No billboards, no crowds, just horses and fields. And the story of how that all changed is one that will take us from 1904 to 1920. From the time the New York Times moved into their new headquarters at 41st and Broadway to when the area was completely transformed by electric signs. And the first step towards that would happen in 1904 when the New York Times building opened its doors. The 1890s were a decade of massive growth for the city of New York. Its population had nearly doubled. And as the country's wealthiest city, it was attracting even more people with its limitless opportunities. And so, with the hopes of expanding their business, the New York Times purchased a plot of land at the corner of 41st and Broadway. Built at the cost of $750,000, or about $24 million in today's money. It was constructed from limestone and designed in the Beaux-Arts style popular at the time. It was the largest and tallest office building in the world, boasting 26 stories high and containing 1,000 rooms inside. It was here that the New York Times would publish some of their most iconic stories over the next several decades. But at the time, the location wasn't exactly ideal. The subway didn't reach this far uptown yet, and the nearest train station was a 15-minute walk away. Most of the people who worked here lived downtown and rode in every day on the elevated trains along 8th Avenue, which ran right past the building. This constant rumble was actually such an annoyance that the New York Times later helped finance the construction of a subway line beneath 8th Avenue as a way to quiet things down. But this wouldn't be the only big change to come to the area, as during this time period, Long Island Railroad lines were extended to the west side, connecting Manhattan to the rest of the boroughs. This led to the rapid development of the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood. And by 1907, a commuter could travel from Brooklyn to Times Square in just 20 minutes, making the area much more desirable to live in. Soon after, the neighborhood was renamed to the Theater District, and that's because between 1905 and 1930, more than 40 new theaters were built around Times Square, including the famed Radio City Music Hall, which opened its doors in 1932. This wave of development caught the attention of advertisers who realized the potential of the area and started buying up space on building facades to put up billboards. In 1905, there were none in the entire neighborhood. But by 1915, there were over 500, many of which were for local Broadway shows trying to attract an audience. And since there were no laws regulating the size of these signs, they just kept getting bigger and brighter. The next big change to come to the area wouldn't be for another 2 decades. And that's because in 1920, the New York Times would move out of their headquarters building and sell it to the New York Life Insurance Company. And while they left the neighborhood, their presence was still felt as the New York Times Square nearby still bore their name. But this is also when the electric signs started going up, and it started with the New York Life Insurance Building. In the years prior to 1920, illuminated advertisements had been gaining popularity across the country, appearing on buildings, barns, and even at baseball games. These early electric signs were powered by electricity, of course, but they used incandescent bulbs instead of neon. They were not only significantly less bright, but also produced a lot of heat, which limited how large they could get. But that was all about to change. In 1915, a French engineer named Georges Claude created a new type of tubing filled with an inert gas called neon, which when electrified glowed a brilliant red-orange color. The following year, he opened up a company in Manhattan to manufacture these neon lights and sell them to the public. And it didn't take long for businesses to start taking notice. One of the first companies to try them out was the New York Life Insurance Company. In 1923, they hired Claude to install a sign on the side of their Times Square building. At 25 feet tall, it was the largest neon sign in the world. Not only was it taller than a 3-story building, but it was also 3 times brighter, allowing the message to be read clearly from further away. Seeing this, other insurance companies like the Travelers followed suit. But the New York Life sign remained the biggest until 1928, when the 48-foot-tall slogan of the new 34-story R.K. O'Keefe's Theater building took its place. These early neon signs were very expensive to make and maintain. The New York Life sign alone cost $10,000 per year to operate, which was equivalent to the salary of 40 factory workers at the time. And for that reason, the neon boom that we see in photos like this one would only last for a few years. But then something happened that changed everything. In 1929, the stock market crashed and the Great Depression began. Overnight, thousands of businesses went bankrupt and the demand for advertising dropped dramatically. Since billboard companies had just recently invested in new technology, they struggled to stay afloat. At the same time, a new material was invented that would bring about the end of the neon era. In 1930, a chemist named John Shelley invented fluorescent lighting. Unlike the neon signs of the 1920s, fluorescent lights were cheap and easy to produce. A single 4-foot bulb cost only $5, meaning that an entire building could be lit up for just hundreds of dollars. It's no surprise then that within just 5 years, every billboard in Times Square had been replaced with a fluorescent light box. By 1935, the neighborhood looked completely different. The brightly colored, eye-catching neon signs had been replaced with clean, crisp white boxes. But while the Great Depression had brought the neon era to an end, war would cause it to make a comeback. During World War I and World War II, metal was needed for military applications, causing a shortage of metal tubing. And since neon signs required miles of tubing per sign, they were largely abandoned in favor of cheaper alternatives. But after the war, there was once again a surplus of metal and the neon boom returned. In fact, the 1950s and 60s saw more neon signs go up in Times Square than ever before, all thanks to new innovations like pre-bent tubing and remote power supplies. Soon, the neighborhood was glowing brighter than ever. At the same time, though, the city was changing. For decades, Times Square had been known as the center of the world, the place where tourists came from all over to see the bright lights and towering billboards. But that was starting to change in the 1960s as a growing number of people started associating Times Square with crime and grime. As photographer Joel Meyerowitz said, quote, "It was sleazy, dirty. There were drug addicts shooting up in the subway below and porno shops on every corner." To combat this reputation, the city invested heavily into cleaning up the area, including banning cars from Broadway between 42nd and 53rd Streets. By 1980, this pedestrian plaza was officially designated as Times Square and has remained largely unchanged ever since. Today, it's hard to imagine a time when Times Square wasn't covered in neon. So next time you find yourself standing in the middle of the crossroads of the world, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of tourists and costumed characters, just remember it all started with a single New York Times building in the middle of a cow pasture. All the photos in this video are from the Library of Congress and the Museum of the City of New York. And if you want to learn more about the history of neon, check out my video on the history of neon signs. Thanks for watching. See you next time.